The clink of silverware stopped for me, but not for them. He said something I didn't catch. She laughed. Loud. Unfiltered. The kind of laugh that makes nearby tables glance over. Hers used to sound like that with me. It hadn't in a long time, and suddenly I realized I missed something I hadn't even known was gone. They were sitting directly across from me, one on each side of the table, and somehow I was the one out of place. She wiped the corner of her eye with the edge of her napkin, still giggling. He poured more wine into her glass, not mine. His hand brushed hers. No apology. No withdrawal. She didn't flinch. I reached for my coat. My arm bumped the candle and it flickered. Neither of them noticed. No one noticed when I stood up. No one noticed when I pulled out my wallet, peeled off a 50, and folded it neatly beside the bread plate. No one noticed when I pushed the chair in with deliberate care, like I was trying not to wake something sleeping. I walked past the bar, past the restroom, out the door, and into nothing. It had been 27 minutes since we sat down. I know because I had checked the time when I ordered, trying to shake off the strange tightness in my chest. I thought maybe it was work stress, maybe low blood sugar. Maybe I just imagined how she looked at him when he walked in. But it wasn't in my head. It was in her eyes. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I stood outside the restaurant for nearly 3 full minutes. I thought maybe she'd follow. Maybe she'd call my name. Maybe even send a text. Wait, what's wrong? But she didn't. And that's when I finally accepted something I think I'd been denying for a long time. She wasn't with me. She was beside me, married to me, shared a mortgage with me, but not with me. The streetlight buzzed above my head as I walked. No destination, just motion. I passed a closed bookstore, a trash bin with roses wilting from someone else's date, and a taxi idling with no one in it. And I thought how fitting that was. Everyone waiting for someone else. Everyone pretending not to be abandoned. By the time I reached home, I wasn't cold anymore. Just hollow. Quiet. The bedroom still smelled like her perfume. Her sweater was on the back of the chair. Her book was face down on the nightstand. It looked like home, but none of it felt safe. I didn't cry. Not that night. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a blank page and started writing. Not because I knew what to say, but because I had nowhere else left to speak. The next morning, I heard the key turn in the door like it always did. 2 clicks, a pause, and that soft creak as it opened. She came in humming. Like someone returning from a spa weekend, not from a dinner where her husband stood up and walked out without a word. Her coat was slung over one arm, heels in the other, barefoot on the tile. I stayed in the kitchen, out of sight, watching the reflection of her in the oven door. She didn't call out my name. She didn't check the bedroom. She didn't ask where I'd gone. Instead, she hung her coat on the hook like nothing had happened. That little hook, the one I installed when we moved in so she wouldn't throw her coats over the chairs. Funny the things you remember when everything else is burning down. She made herself tea, opened the fridge, bit into an apple, still humming. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the hallway like a ghost still haunting the house he built. She finally turned, and our eyes met across the distance. There wasn't guilt in her face. There wasn't even surprise. Just a flicker of mild inconvenience. Like I was early for something I wasn't invited to. I figured you were tired, she said casually. You left so suddenly. Suddenly? I stood there for 5 full minutes while she laughed with another man. I paid the bill. I left without a word. She noticed none of it. And now, I was the one being framed as abrupt? I left because I didn't belong there, I said. Calm. Cold. She rolled her eyes, took another bite of the apple, and said the words that confirmed what I already knew but hadn't yet admitted out loud. Don't be dramatic, Grant. He's just a friend. She called me dramatic. She called me dramatic. I felt something inside me curl up and retreat. Not anger. Not even sadness. Something older, deeper, disappointment in myself. Because I realized I'd been tolerating this for longer than I wanted to admit. And maybe, deep down, I was just waiting for her to do something obvious enough that I couldn't keep lying to myself anymore. I didn't respond. I just walked past her and went into the bedroom. She didn't follow. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the photo on the dresser, the 2 of us at Lake Glenmore, 6 years ago. She was leaning into me, sunglasses on, a windbreaker zipped up to her chin. I looked at that photo and felt nothing. Just distance. Like looking at strangers on someone else's vacation. By the time evening rolled around, she was in the living room with a glass of wine and a movie playing. Something light, something romantic. She didn't invite me to join. I didn't ask. I stayed in the bedroom, door cracked open, watching shadows flicker on the hallway wall. And then something strange happened. She laughed again. Same laugh. Full, joyful, unguarded. But this time, she wasn't on the phone. She wasn't texting. She wasn't with anyone. She was laughing at a line in the movie. Alone. And somehow, that broke me even more. Because I realized something then. She didn't need me for that kind of happiness anymore. Whatever part of her used to laugh with me had already gone elsewhere. Maybe to him. Maybe to someone else. Or maybe just gone completely. That night, I opened my laptop and started reading about emotional detachment. I started reading posts from other people in my position. People who stayed too long. People who waited for the person they loved to come back, not realizing they'd left months, sometimes years ago. And every post felt like someone else was writing my thoughts before I could. But none of their stories felt like mine. Because I hadn't reached the worst part yet. That would come the next day. And it would arrive in a way that not even my worst assumptions had prepared me for. It arrived in the mail the next morning. No stamp. No return address. Just a hand-delivered green envelope resting awkwardly in our mailbox like it didn't belong there. Because it didn't. It was tucked between a local gym flyer and the electric bill. At first, I thought it was one of those wedding invitations we sometimes still got from people she used to work with, the ones I never really knew. But it wasn't that. It wasn't anything like that. The paper was thick, textured, expensive, the kind you don't buy unless what you're sending is supposed to matter. There was no name on it. Just my initials, scrawled in the center like an afterthought. GW. I stood in the kitchen turning it over in my hand, and something about the way it was sealed, too perfectly, too intentionally, made my stomach twist before I even opened it. Inside, there were two things. A photo. And a key. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. My wife, Elara, sitting in the front seat of a car. Her hand on Cohen's thigh. His hand on her neck. They weren't kissing. They weren't even touching lips. It was worse. Their foreheads were pressed together, eyes closed, smiling. Intimate in a way that screamed history. The timestamp on the photo was from 2 weeks ago. A Wednesday. She had told me she was working late. The key was taped to the back of the photo. Standard black plastic key fob, labeled with a single number written in red Sharpie. 3C. I didn't understand. At least, not right away. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just staring at both of them, letting the reality tighten around my throat inch by inch. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even angry. I felt detached, like I'd stepped out of my own skin and was watching someone else's life fall apart. The worst part? There was a strange sense of relief beginning to rise beneath all of it. Like finally, I wasn't crazy. Like someone had quietly walked into the theater of my denial, turned on the lights, and shown me that the room was already empty. I put the photo back in the envelope, left the key on the counter, sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the maple tree across the street, and for the first time in a long while, I let myself imagine the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could leave. Really leave. Not in some dramatic storm out or shouting match. Just slip out of the narrative. I didn't confront her that day. She was in her office when I came in. Door shut. Headphones on. Typing. To anyone else, she would have looked like a loyal remote worker, deeply focused, dedicated. But I saw the glass of red wine tucked behind her laptop, half full, smudged with lipstick. 11:30 a.m. Later that night, I asked her how work had gone. Boring, she said. Same old stuff. Clients don't know what they want until they hate what you give them. I nodded. You go anywhere after? She shook her head. Didn't leave the house? And that was the moment I stopped believing anything that came out of her mouth. I went to bed early that night and left the key on the nightstand where I knew she'd see it. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. When I woke up the next morning, it was gone. No note. No conversation. No confrontation. But the envelope, that green envelope, had been slid back under the bedroom door, this time with one word written on it in black ink. Don't. That was the entire message. Just don't. Not signed. Not addressed. No explanation. But it told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't just guilty. She was scared. And suddenly, I wasn't sure what I'd been dragged into. It took me 3 days to decide whether to use the key. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I already knew I'd cross some invisible line the moment I held that photo. Before that, I was just suspicious. Uncomfortable. Maybe even a little paranoid. But once the picture reached my hands, I wasn't wondering anymore. I was verifying. And verifying has consequences. The address came from her phone. I hadn't checked her phone in over 7 years of marriage, not even once. She had a passcode, of course, but it hadn't changed in forever. Her childhood dog's name, all lowercase. She used it for everything. I told myself I was only opening it because of the key, because of the envelope, because she left me with a warning and not an explanation. But that was a lie. I was doing it because deep down, I wanted this to end. I just needed a final push. The texts were under C, not Cohen. Just C. Fitting, I guess. Like she knew the full name would sting if I ever saw it. Their most recent exchange was short. Her, I don't think he'll go. Him, if he does, it's on you. Her, he's not like that. Him, people break differently. You never really know until they do. The address was buried further back. 2 weeks ago, she had sent him a photo of a red door with peeling paint and a caption, just had it repainted. Looks worse than before. Below it was a single text from him. Don't let him find the closet. The closet. I stared at those 5 words like they were a countdown clock. The building was only 20 minutes away. A block of apartments above a strip of shuttered stores and a check-cashing place. No security. No camera. A side entrance with buzzer buttons that barely lit up. I stood outside for at least 10 minutes, key in my palm, trying to figure out who I was going to become once I stepped inside. The hallway to 3C smelled like stale carpet and something faintly metallic. The kind of place no one decorated for the holidays, where every sound seemed louder than it should be. I stood in front of the door, half hoping the key wouldn't work. But it slid in like it had been waiting for me. The apartment was cold. Not abandoned, just unused. There were no signs of anyone living there. No food. No photos. No clutter. Just a leather couch, 1 chair, a lamp, and a rug with a stain near the edge. It wasn't a home. It was a holding space. But there was a closet. At the end of the hall. Closed. Small. Beige door. Silver knob. I opened it. There were no skeletons. No drugs. No hidden cameras. Just silence until I turned on the light. Inside were 2 things. A black duffel bag filled with clothes. Her clothes. A second phone. A toothbrush. Makeup bag. Extra underwear. And a folder. The folder had my name on it. Not hers. Not his. Mine. Inside were papers. Copies of my credit card statements. Printouts of my emails. Screenshots of old social media posts I didn't even remember making. Notes in the margins. Her handwriting. His handwriting. Arrows. Circles. Names I didn't recognize. And at the very back, a page titled Fallout Plan A. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a setup. A long one. I sat on the floor of that apartment with that folder in my lap for almost an hour. My breath felt thin. I kept telling myself I was misinterpreting. That maybe this was all about something else. An old plan from before we worked through things. A misunderstanding. But the more I read, the more I saw my life disassembled on paper, not out of concern, not out of protection, but with surgical coldness. A list of my vulnerabilities. My mental health history. A chart of when I'd last seen a therapist. A timeline of when I lost clients in my freelance work. Someone had been preparing for me to fall apart. Not by accident. By design. I left the apartment without touching anything else. I didn't take the folder. I didn't take the phone. I didn't want fingerprints. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I walked 5 miles before I realized I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't go home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because what I had just found changed everything. And it made her warning, that one word scribbled in black ink, echo louder in my head than any scream ever could. Don't. She wasn't protecting me. She was protecting herself. Back in college, I once heard a professor say something that stuck with me, though I didn't understand it until now. Some betrayals are quiet not because they're kind, but because they've already been rehearsed. I never forgot it. I just never thought it would apply to me. I didn't sleep that night. I ended up at a 24-hour diner near the freeway, sitting in a cracked leather booth that smelled like grease and bleach. The waitress called me sweetheart, but I didn't respond. I kept replaying that folder in my mind. Her notes. The order of everything. The way it had been cataloged like a psychological profile. A list of my flaws, fears, limitations. Not one mention of love. Not even once. I remembered a section marked escalation triggers. It listed phrases I'd said in past arguments, things like, I don't like when you disappear for hours, or why won't you talk to me when something's wrong? And next to each one, her responses were recorded, as if she was testing how far she could push before I cracked, like I was some case study in fragility. But what made it worse was the handwritten line underneath. If Grant loses income, he loses confidence. Emotional shutdown follows within 7 to 10 days. Who the hell writes that about their husband? Unless they're not really a spouse. Unless they're preparing to weaponize what they know. I left the diner as the sun was coming up, and for the first time in years, I didn't go home. I couldn't. Not while that apartment existed. Not while I still didn't understand what it was all for. Divorce? Maybe. Blackmail? Possibly. But it didn't feel like either. It felt preemptive, strategic, like something was already in motion, and I had just stumbled into the blueprint halfway through. I called in sick to my freelance clients. I didn't even fake a voice. I just said I needed a few days off. They didn't argue. One of them asked if everything was okay, and I told him I appreciated the question. Then I turned off my phone. I needed answers. Not rage. Not impulse. Just clarity. So I went back to the building. Not to 3C. To the mailboxes downstairs. Cohen's last name was listed on the label next to 3C, not hers. Which meant the lease was in his name. Which also meant Alara had lied when she said she barely knew him. People don't keep emergency kits in apartments they barely visit. They don't stock toothbrushes and burner phones for someone they just met in a yoga class. But what really caught my attention was that the mailbox for 3C had a second label beneath the first, taped over poorly, but still legible. M. Claiborne. I recognized the name. Not right away. But by the time I got home and dug through our old documents, I found it. 2 years ago, she filed taxes using a consulting agency. I remember asking her why she didn't just use TurboTax like usual. She brushed me off. Said it was Ford deductions. That she had complex stuff now. But I remembered the return address on the envelope back then. It said M. Claiborne Financial Services. At the time, I assumed it was just a firm. Now I knew it was something else. She had a second name. Or at least access to one. Maybe fake. Maybe not. And the plan in that folder, it wasn't just about preparing for a fight. It was about staging one. One of the pages had a mock affidavit draft. Not a legal one. Just a template. It alleged financial instability, emotional neglect, erratic behavior. There was even a note suggesting she might plant a recording if necessary to show instability. Planned a recording. That's when I stopped shaking and started planning. This wasn't a breakup. It was a takedown. I wasn't living with a cheating wife. I was living with someone preparing to erase me quietly, efficiently, and with a smile. And the terrifying part? She was good at it. I returned home just after sunset. Everything was in place. Lights on. Dinner warming. She was in the kitchen stirring pasta like we were newlyweds. No confrontation. No reference to the key. No mention of the folder. She turned to me and said, "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" It took everything in me not to laugh. But I smiled. I told her I was fine. Because now I knew what I was really dealing with. And I wasn't going to play defense anymore. 2 days later, I had a name. Not hers. Not Cohen's. A third one. It came from a storage unit lease I found folded between junk mail in our shared filing cabinet. I wasn't snooping at first. I was just trying to stay busy, to stop myself from spiraling. But buried under a pile of expired warranties and dog-eared takeout menus, I found a contract signed by someone named Lena Doyle. The handwriting was hers. I recognized the sharp edge on the lowercase l. She always wrote her LS like an arrow pointing east. The address was on the other side of town, near the industrial park, one of those cheap self-storage facilities with keypad gates and rusted roll-up doors. The unit number, B17. The lease was still active. I checked the website and logged in using her usual password variations. It worked on the third try. She'd last accessed the unit 12 days ago. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just drove out there late on a Sunday morning, wearing gloves and a hat, pretending I was someone else. When the keypad accepted the code and the gate rolled back with that slow metallic groan, I felt something shift inside me, like I was finally about to cross the last threshold. The one people never come back from once they see what's on the other side. Unit B17 wasn't locked. Not really. Just a padlock left open, resting on the latch like it was supposed to fool someone lazy. I took it off, slid the door up, and stood still. The air inside smelled like paper, plastic, and something faintly floral, like her shampoo. The first thing I saw was a mannequin. No head, just a torso on a stand, dressed in a fitted black dress I had never seen before. Around it were boxes, neatly stacked, labeled in coded abbreviations, CD, 21, GFW, LD Docs. I opened the first one. It was full of wigs. 5 of them. All shades she'd never worn around me. Dark auburn, Platinum blonde. One with bangs. I reached into another box. A burner phone. 3 SIM cards. A fake ID with her photo, but under the name Lena Doyle. The birth date was different by 4 years. The address? An apartment complex that had burned down last summer. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was a second life, one I had never been allowed to see. But the worst part, the thing that made me drop the ID on the ground and step back like it had burned me, was the next box. Inside were letters. Printed out emails. Dozens of them. Conversations between Lena and multiple men. She was using different tones in each exchange. In some, she sounded sweet and shy. In others, bold and seductive. A few were transactional. Cold. Negotiated. She'd done this before. Not just once. Over and over again. Different names. Different men. Always keeping control. Always documenting every thread. One file was titled, A. Merrick Collapse Timeline. It was a breakdown of another man's spiral. Just like mine. Same tone. Same pacing. Wait for work stress. Distance with family. Trigger. Jealousy. Push. Detachment. Final move. Exit with plausible deniability. Exit. With plausible deniability. I felt sick. My hands were sweating through the gloves. I opened one last folder, and inside was a single photo. A man I didn't recognize. He was standing outside of a house, smiling at someone off camera. The back of the photo had a note written in the same handwriting as everything else. He almost figured it out. Glad I didn't wait too long. I put everything back exactly as I found it. Closed the lid. Shut the unit. Relocked the padlock. And as I walked back to my car, one thought echoed through my head with the weight of a freight train. She's done this before. And every time, she vanished before anyone could catch her. Which meant I was next. Unless I figured out how to become the first one she didn't see coming. But how do you outmaneuver someone who's been 10 steps ahead from the beginning? That night, I returned home. She was in the bath, candles lit, soft music playing, the kind of evening people post about online to show how at peace they are. I stood in the hallway for a long time just watching her silhouette behind the frosted glass. She didn't know what I knew now, but she would. And when she did, I wanted her to feel one thing she had never allowed herself to feel before. Fear. On Wednesday, I broke one of her wine glasses. Not on purpose. I wasn't storming through the kitchen or lashing out. I was rinsing it, slowly, carefully, letting the hot water pool and rise, when it just slipped through my fingers and shattered in the sink. Stem snapped clean. A sound like a shot in a quiet room. Alara rushed in like she'd heard an alarm go off. She looked me over quickly, checked the glass, then smiled. Be careful, that's the last of the good ones. And then she turned around and walked out of the kitchen. That was the moment I realized how deeply she believed she'd already won. There was no panic in her voice. No trace of suspicion. She was so calm, so completely at ease in her deception, that even a minor incident didn't raise her radar. Because in her mind, I was still the same man who got quiet when confused, who folded inward instead of fighting. A man easy to manage. Predictable. Soft. But I wasn't that man anymore. I spent the next 2 days quietly observing. I didn't confront her. I didn't raise my voice or change my tone. I brought her coffee in the mornings. I complimented her dress. I even laughed at her jokes. It wasn't forgiveness. It was camouflage. She never suspected I had seen the storage unit. Never once brought up the key. And I never asked where the folder had gone after I left it in her sight. I didn't need to. The real answer was already clear. It was never meant to be found. And once I did, she had to change course. That Friday evening, she told me she had a girls' night. She said it with a smile. Lighthearted. Careless. And I knew she was lying. She wore her leather boots, the ones she reserves for spontaneous, as she once described it. She changed perfumes 3 times before settling on one I didn't recognize, musky, heavy, unfamiliar. She used a bag I hadn't seen before, and left wearing lipstick she never wears around me. Don't wait up, she said. I didn't even nod. I just smiled. And the moment she was gone, I got in my car and waited a block down, parked near the pharmacy. I didn't follow her at first. I waited for 25 minutes before driving in the direction she'd gone. I wasn't tailing her like a jealous husband. I wasn't tracking her like a movie detective. I already knew where she was going. I just needed to see who was waiting there. She didn't go to a bar, or a friend's house, or a restaurant. She went to a townhouse on the west side. Well lit. 2 stories. Red brick. Curtains drawn. And she didn't knock. She used a key. I parked a block away and waited. From the angle I had, I could see the front entrance but not the windows. I watched as the lights flicked on, one by one. Living room, kitchen, upstairs. She moved like she'd done it 100 times. Because she had. She'd told me Cohen lived in a downtown studio. But this wasn't downtown. And this wasn't a studio. Which meant I was watching her third life unfold. A second home. Not hers, no. But familiar to her. Close enough to access. Private enough to never come up in conversation. I stayed in the car for nearly 3 hours. Long enough to see all the lights turn off again, one by one. Long enough to confirm she wasn't coming home that night. The house never went dark completely. A hallway light stayed on. Around 1:30 a.m., I drove away. Not because I was done, but because I'd seen enough. And because the next move required precision. I spent the entire next day printing everything. The storage unit photos. The fake IDs. The email transcripts. The alternate names. The townhouse address. The timeline chart from her own folder. Everything went into a new binder. I added sticky notes where I needed to. I included screenshots of her texts to see. I made it so that anyone, even a stranger, could follow the story from start to finish. Then I made 5 copies. And I mailed 4 of them. One to a woman I had only ever met once, her older sister, a lawyer in Phoenix. One to her former employer, who had once considered rehiring her part-time. One to a man I found on Facebook, the one from the photo in the folder, Merrick. And one I left unmarked, inside our locked home office. In the printer tray. She never checks the printer tray. The 5th copy? That one stayed with me. Because I wasn't just documenting the fall anymore. I was building the landing. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. Because I had no idea what she was capable of when her performance finally fell apart. But I was starting to suspect she didn't either. Sunday morning came quiet. No wind. No clouds. The kind of stillness that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. She walked into the kitchen around 9:40 a.m., barefoot, wearing the same clothes from the night before. Hair tied back loosely. Phone still in her hand. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look nervous. She looked unbothered. I poured her a cup of coffee. No words. Just handed it to her gently and returned to my seat. For several minutes, we sat there in silence, like 2 people waiting for a storm they both knew was coming but neither wanted to name. She sipped slowly, scrolling through something on her screen. Then finally, without looking up, she said, "You've been acting strange." That was her way of trying to reclaim control. Not accusation. Just suggestion. A way to put me back on the defensive. But this time, I didn't play along. I reached into the drawer beside me and placed a white envelope on the table. One of the 5. She paused, her finger hovering over her phone screen. Her eyes flicked to the envelope. "What is that?" she asked. "Everything," I said softly. "Everything you thought I wouldn't see." She didn't move. She didn't reach for it. Just stared like the paper itself was ticking. I know about Lena Doyle. I know about the townhouse. The storage unit. The alternate lives. The emails. The men. The timelines. The plans. I kept my voice even. Calm. "You were setting me up, Alara. And maybe you still are. But I'm not going to be the one who breaks quietly in the background of your story." Her lips parted, just slightly. No apology. Not even fear. Just the beginning of denial. "You don't understand," she started. "I understand enough," I interrupted. "And I don't need a confession. This isn't a trial. It's a conclusion." She pushed the coffee away like it had suddenly become toxic. "You went through my things? You left them for someone to find. I just happened to be first." The tension that rose in the room wasn't loud. It was cold, like something ancient crawling up the spine. Then she stood up, fast. "So what? You're going to blackmail me?" "No," I said. "I'm going to walk away." She stopped, just froze in place. "What?" "I've already spoken to a lawyer." Quietly, carefully. "There's nothing in your name. You've been smart, I'll give you that. But I was careful too. I've protected what little I have left. I've moved money, transferred ownership, and I've put everything in writing." Her voice rose slightly. "So you're just done?" "Yes," I said. "I'm done. Not because I hate you, but because I refuse to be someone you dismantle just to feel powerful." And then I stood. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't demand answers to questions I'd never get. I walked to the hallway, grabbed my bag, and picked up the final copy of the binder from the shelf. The one marked with a single word. Truth. She watched me the whole time. But she didn't move to stop me. She didn't say goodbye. She just stood in the middle of the kitchen, blinking like she'd just woken up in a house she didn't recognize. I left the envelope on the table. I left the door open behind me. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't look back. 3 months have passed. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment now. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Quiet. Real. I spend my mornings walking to a coffee shop near the pier. I talk to strangers more now. I listen better. I breathe differently. And every once in a while, I find myself standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and thinking, this is peace. No chaos. No double meanings. No rehearsed betrayals. Just me. Still standing. Still whole. Still free.